Budgets are always tricky to navigate, this one especially so with the Brexit as a backdrop and the Prime Minister's promise to end austerity. So when I sat down with the Chancellor, he told me that the budget he'll be outlining tomorrow assumes there will be a Brexit deal, and if there isn't, there will have to be a new budget and a change of direction for the economy. But I started by asking if austerity is really coming to an end, and if so, what that actually means.
The Prime Minister has said that once we get the deal done with the European Union and we can look to the future and the spending review that we will do next year, we will be able to show the British people that their hard work has paid off and that we will be able to continue getting our debt down, because that's an essential thing to do, but also be able to provide a bit more support for our public services in the future.
So it could be more spending then?
Well, I think people recognise that there has been enormous pressure on the public services as we've dealt with the aftermath of Labour's recession, rebuilt our public finances, but we are now at a turning point. Our debt is falling, the public finances are performing better, and people now want to know that there is a little bit of relief coming down the line. But I would say this, I don't think that this is only about public services. It's also about real wages. People want to feel that their real wages are going to grow year after year after year, that they can plan ahead on the basis of that real increase in incomes and living standards. And they also want to know that whatever we do with the public services isn't just being done by taxing them more, that they will actually be able to keep more of their hard-earned wages to spend on the things that matter to them and their families.
You were talking there about the spending review next year and about the deal. So would it be right to assume then that the end of austerity isn't going to be coming in the budget, it's going to be a bit of a longer project?
Well, the Prime Minister referred to the spending review next year because in terms of public services, that is when we will set out our plans for spending over the next few years in the normal way. What I will do in the budget tomorrow is set out broadly a spending envelope going forward, but the detail will be for the spending review, because that's when we quite properly look at the envelope of money available and decide collectively what our priorities are for the next few years. That, to me, is the responsible way to budget. First of all, you work out how much money you've got, and then you decide what your priorities are for spending it.
The problem you've got, isn't it, that people aren't going to feel like austerity is actually ending unless they can see it having an impact in their lives. And things have been difficult, as you've said, since 2010. School budgets down 8%, 20,000 fewer police in England and Wales. The Welfare Secretary has admitted that universal credit will leave some people worse off. These people aren't going to believe you when you say there's light at the end of the tunnel unless you address some of these things.
Well, school spending is protected in real terms per
up to
pupil.
The age of 16.
Police funding we protected in the 2015 spending review settlement. But I accept that public services have been under pressure. They've made enormous efforts to deliver efficiency, doing more with less. And people do want to know that we've reached a turning point where we can provide more support for our public services in the future. But don't forget, we've already made, and I can talk about this because it's not a secret in the budget, we've already made the most important budget announcement back in June that we're going to put £80+ billion over the next 5 years into the NHS. So over £20 billion a year of additional real terms money by the end of this forecast period. Transformational investment in the National Health Service.
I noticed there that you talked about the NHS, you talked about schools, you talked about the police, you didn't talk about universal credit. And actually, for some of those people who are going to be worse off, the most vulnerable people in society, many of them, they're not going to feel like austerity is ending. According to the Resolution Foundation, 3 million working families losing £2,500 a year, a 50% rise in people using food banks in areas where universal credit has been rolled out. I mean, putting the kind of accountant's sort of answers aside, do you really understand what it's like for those people?
So universal credit is a very important innovation. The legacy benefit system that we operated for years left millions of people stranded, out of work, unable to work, because they'd have made themselves worse off by going into work. What universal credit does is ensure that everybody is supported to move into work and that they are always better off in work. So it's a very important structural reform
I can understand
of the economy
why
and the benefit
you're saying
system.
that, but if you are a parent who is going to a food bank because you can't work out how to give food on the table, you can understand why that might feel like the kind of accounting.
Exactly. So let me finish the point. So I think that universal credit is a very important innovation, and once it's rolled out, people will see that it's a much better way to run a welfare system. But there have been issues around the transition from legacy benefits into universal credit. Many of the kind of problems that you're talking about occur when people move from one system into the other, and there's a mismatch in the way the systems work. I've already put over £2 billion into, over the last two budgets, into smoothing that transition.
Are you looking at more money?
Well, we continue to look at how this process is working, and if we find cliff edges and difficulties, frictions in the move from the old benefit system to universal credit, then of course we'll always try to smooth those out and be pragmatic about this.
Now, I know that you're looking at investing in roads. For lots of people, potholes on their street are a very visible sign of austerity. So what are you planning on doing?
Well, I am going to make some more additional money available for local authorities to deal with urgent repairs, potholes in roads, repair work on bridges. These are small projects in themselves, but they make a huge difference to people, and actually they make a huge difference to the efficiency of the road system overall. So this is money well spent, well invested. But more widely, we have to look at investment in our roads, and I will be making an important announcement about the hypothecation of vehicle excise duty so that it is all spent on funding our strategic roads network for the future. That's an important investment in Britain's productivity.
I'm also interested in your plans for the high street. Debenhams announcing that 50 stores are closing, just the latest retailer to really come under pressure. And I can't help think sometimes that we talk a lot about subsidising some industries, the steel industry, the banks, but for lots of people the high street is absolutely at the heart of their community. So do you recognise that, and are you planning on doing anything about it?
So I absolutely recognise that. The high street plays a critical role in many communities. But we have to recognise as well that the change that's driving the evolution of our high street can't be put back in the bottle. The British have taken to online shopping like no other nation on earth. And for better or for worse, we have to recognise that that is happening. So our high streets have to change. We want to protect them because we want them to remain at the heart of our communities. But we can't do that by freezing the model of 10 or 20 years ago in Aspic. It won't work. So we've got to help the high street to evolve. And the high street of the future, frankly, will have fewer retail outlets and more leisure destinations, more food and drink outlets. I expect that high streets of the future will be smaller, with more of the peripheral areas around them redeveloped as housing.
Are you looking at things like business rates or online transaction taxes, for example?
Yeah, of course we'll look at the ways in which we can help to smooth this process. But it's very important that we recognise that the high street will have to change.
Where do you shop?
We can support the high street as it changes, but we can't prevent that change from happening.
Where do you shop?
Guildford, usually, which has actually a very nice high street. But
are you an online shopper as well? Do you use Amazon?
I am an online shopper, I do, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm also keen, of course, to talk about Brexit, because this is really, the backdrop for your budget. And you've been pretty honest about some of the consequences of not getting a deal, and 10%, for example, being cut from GDP if that happens. So if there isn't a deal, will you still be able to end austerity?
Well, I'm very confident that we will negotiate a deal with the European Union, and the main element of that deal has to be that we continue to have frictionless access to European markets on a reciprocal basis.
But if you don't get what you want, will you be able to end austerity if there isn't a deal?
Well, if we don't get a deal, if we were to leave the European Union without any deal, and I think that's an extremely unlikely situation, but of course we have to prepare and plan for all eventualities, as any prudent government would. If we were to find ourselves in that situation, then we would need to take a different approach to the future of Britain's economy. We would need to look at a different strategy, and frankly, we'd need to have a new budget that set out a different strategy for the future.
So less spending is that what you're saying?
The approach that I'm going to be setting out tomorrow is based on the assumption, as is the OBR's report, of a deal being done with the European Union and us continuing to be able to trade on reasonable terms with our closest neighbours in Europe.
So I'm just to really try and get to the gist of what you're saying, if there isn't a deal, which I know you don't want, would there be less money for government departments? Would austerity continue?
Well, there would be we would have to wait and see what the situation was. If we left the European Union without a deal, we would want to see how markets and businesses and consumers responded to that. And then, as any responsible government would, we would take appropriate fiscal measures to protect the economy, to prepare us for the future, and to strike out in a new direction that would ensure that Britain was able to succeed whatever the circumstances we found ourselves in. And of course it wouldn't only be us as the government, it would also be the Bank of England, responsible for monetary policy, that would be looking at that situation and taking action to protect the economy.
Even if we get a deal, are we going to be worse off after Brexit?
My job is to make sure that we're better off, and we go on getting better off. We've had, for 200 years,
not quite what I asked,
with a few intervening periods, we've had 200 years in which our living standards have consistently raised. Over my lifetime, people's living standards have almost doubled, and we want to go on seeing that growth in living standards so that we can make good on our promise to the next generation that they too will be better off than their parents.
Okay. Now, some people in your party have been a bit scathing about your attitude towards Brexit. Boris Johnson describing the Treasury as the enemy of Remain. You've also been described as Eeyore. I mean, are you a bit gloomy about Brexit? Is that fair?
No, I don't think so at all. I think what we've done is, the Treasury has done, as a department at the centre of government, has taken the decision of the British people and sought to deliver it, implement it in a way that protects our economy, protects living standards, and delivers on all the many other things that the British people want. Because yes, people went out in their millions to express an opinion on this very important issue. But if you go and ask them whether this is the most important issue to them, many of them will tell you, no, I'm concerned about policing, about education, about the health service, about my own
But all these
personal
things could
living
be
standards.
impacted by what you're saying,
Of course.
if there's less money to go around for that deal.
And that's what I'm saying. Our job is to take the instruction of the British people on Brexit and to ensure that we deliver it in a way that also allows us to go on delivering what they want to see on health services, on education, on police, on defence, on the environment, and all the other things that they regard as very important to them.
Just finally, do you think you're able to be perhaps a little bit more honest when it comes to Brexit than some of your cabinet colleagues? Because you're perhaps the only person sitting around the table who doesn't fancy the job as Prime Minister.
Well, I hope I'm always honest. I always try to be honest. Sometimes it gets me into a bit of trouble from some of my advisors. But I always try to be honest. I always try to answer the questions that I'm asked, because actually I think one of the ways in which we rebuild faith and confidence in politics is by politicians trying to be honest with people about the really big challenges that we face.
Do you think some of your other party members should be a bit more honest?
Well, I'm sure all my colleagues are very honest with you all the time, Sophie.
Of course.
And I'm sure they'd all be delighted to come and sit in this chair and be equally honest and open with you.
Chancellor, thank you very much.
Thank you.